Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Happy Hour, brought to you by NAP. We are the National Association of Adoptees and Parents, where it is our mission to unify the adoption community and elevate our diverse voices by promoting dialogue, understanding, and healing through education, awareness, and connections. I'm Marcie Keithley, Board President and host for this evening. And for those of you that are just joining us, it is Derby weekend here in Kentuckiana, thus the Fascinator. But we're honored to have so many of you join us tonight. We just appreciate you showing up in your homes every Friday night at 7 o'clock and listening in. So thanks so much. Before I introduce this evening's guests, Jennifer, we have got here we go. Again, please remain on mute. Raise your hand on screen or the virtual hand to be recognized. You're welcome to post your questions or comments in the chat bar. This is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential. Portions of this event are recorded and may be shared in our private happy hour group on Facebook. So if you don't follow us there, please join us over there. If you're experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thought, please contact a licensed professional or call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Okay. Well, let's dig in and let's welcome our guest, Bob Steil, all the way from Lawrence, Kansas. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Marcie. Hi, everybody. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here today.
Great. We're so excited to have you with us this evening. And I'm just going to read just a little bit about Bob for all of us. He currently resides in Lawrence, Kansas. He's an Illinois licensed attorney and has spent his career doing government relations work in both the state and federal areas, including working for over 12 years in Washington, D.C. His time is spent working for a national healthcare trade association and for various healthcare and financial service companies, as well as doing his own independent consulting. In addition, during that time, he spent a number of years managing a state and federal government affairs staff. He's represented entities for over 30 years. He's represented entities before over 30 state legislatures and agencies and governor's offices, as well as before the United States Congress and various federal agencies. He's a native Chicagoan. He's married and has 3 children and 3 grandchildren. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a Juris Doctor degree from the Washington University and St. Louis School of Law. That's a mouthful. Wow. It's just short and sweet to say, hello, Bob, the attorney and adoptee. Welcome. Welcome to Happy Hour.
Yes, thank you very much.
Well, we're going to start off. Bob has written an essay, and he's got, as all of us do, an amazing story to tell. And we're going to start off and learn a little bit about his journey, and we'll pick it up from there. So, Bob, you want to share with us a little bit of your story?
Yes, thanks, Marcie. And I was telling Marcie before, I've testified before a number of state legislatures in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. But this today is a different experience for me. I feel like I am among friends, and I feel like I'm part of this community. So this is it's personal. I'm really not representing anyone but myself, and but in some ways my fellow adoptees as well.
And I think it's interesting for the community to know, Bob, that Bob's spoken many times and shared his story with others, but never in a group setting like this, right? This is your first time. So
this is my first time. And, to be honest, I haven't told a lot of other people about the fact that I'm an adoptee. There's really no particular reason, but that's a fact. And I've never, as you indicated, Marcie, spoken before a group. It just hasn't happened. But there's always been part of me that wanted to share my story, which was why I was so pleased to be able to write the essay, which I wrote 6 years ago. and why I am so pleased and grateful to have the opportunity to speak to all of you here today. What I want to start with is it's a little different, but it's a story. And it's a story that I think many of you, this will resonate with you. And it concerns a young unmarried woman back in the years 1949 and 1950, who journeyed from her home, from a small town in the Midwest to a big city to have her baby. She was alone, spent a few months in the big city, a city totally unfamiliar to her. She had her baby and returned to her home. But her return home was not like the return you would normally expect when you've had a baby. There were no smiles. There was no laughter. There was no joy. There was only silence. And this was never spoken of again. But during that young woman's stay in the hospital, there was a letter that was written. And I'm going to read that letter to you now. This letter was written in Chicago, Illinois on January 26, 1950. And it reads as follows. Dear Daddy, you've heard a lot about me, thought and talked about me, but you've never seen me. I'm your son, William Jeffrey. I was born at 4:30 p.m., January 23rd. I weighed 8 pounds, 6 ounces, and was 5.3 centimeters long. So I'm a mighty big little fellow. By the way, I am the longest baby in the nursery. The average newborn is 49 centimeters. I have dark brown hair, a dark complexion, and deep blue eyes. I really am a cute little fellow, everyone says. Neither too fat nor thin. I don't even have that pink look to my skin as most little babies have. My mom really loves me, and she just hates to even think of having to leave me. She says that she is sure that you would feel the same if you saw me. I like the beautiful orchid you sent to her, and she is really wild about it. It made her so happy. I'm going to say so long for now. Mom said that I should tell you that she will write to you tomorrow because she gets up then. She is still in bed now and doesn't feel too much like writing today. Signed, your loving son, Billy.
Okay.
The three people alluded to here, the young woman, the man, and the child, are my birth mother, my birth father, and me. And it's safe to say that what is described by this letter is something that affected all of us for the rest of our lives. I will also, even if you may remember the title of my presentation, and this was the title of my essay, is my name was Billy, because it was. My name was Billy. So that's really, I guess, how my journey as an adoptee started. I found out when I was 11 years old that I was adopted. I was talking to my mom, and I don't even know why I thought about it, but I asked her. We were out running errands, and it took her by surprise. And she said, no, you're not adopted. Well, later that day, she came up to me and said, and she called me Bobby at the time. Bobby, I have to talk to you. You are adopted. Hit me like a thunderbolt. Again, I was 11. And again, I think a lot of kids ask that question. For whatever reason, I was not expecting the answer I received. And it's safe to say that that sort of set me off on a lifelong journey. And I think been thinking about really what compelled me all these years, and it's a need. More than anything, it's a need. It's been a need to find out who I was and who I am. So for a number of years went by. I would think about it once in a while, not a whole lot. I didn't ask my mom anything more about it. Never did ask my dad during those years about it. But occasionally I would ask my mom something. I got to be about 20 years old. I was in college. And I became a little more curious. And I asked my mom again. I said, well, is there any more information that you can give me? And she had some that she could give me. It was very brief, wasn't much, but it was about my birth mother, a little bit about the genealogy, not much, but she happened to be a law student. That I knew, but that was it. So years went by. Coincidentally, I ended up going to law school. And we had a child. My wife and I did my third year of law school. And when that happened, that really set something off inside of me again. And it got to the point, I'll never forget it. It was my third year of law school. I was going to graduate in about a month and a half. We were having spring break. And my wife and daughter and I went to the zoo. And I told my wife, and this is not like me, I said, I can't take this anymore. I knew a little bit more about my situation, and I haven't been able to find this record again, but I found what looked to be the paper that contained my birth mother's relinquishment of me. And it had her name and where she signed the paper. It was an unusual surname, not Smith or Jones. So I had that to work off. That was it. And I knew she was a law student. So I told my wife, I said, we're flying up to the town where she signed this paper tomorrow. I know virtually nothing, but I know these things. And we're going to see if we can make some headway. To make a long story short, within 48 hours, I was standing outside my mother's door in Minnesota. I had found out sufficient information. She was an attorney at that time. And I can get into that more if you want to, but I found out sufficient information to locate her. She was, in fact, only about 50 miles away from me. So, and this is just a small thing I wanted to mention to you. So I'm in the car with my wife and my 7-month-old daughter going to find my birth mother. And the song that was playing, I will never forget, was by Kansas, called Carry On, My Wayward Son. Never forget that. Thought this is interesting timing. So I had made up my mind that what I was going to do was go to my birth mother's office, and I wasn't going to give her a chance to say she didn't want to see me. I wasn't going to give her that opportunity. So went in, knocked on the door, and she said, well, come in. As soon as I saw her, I knew, yeah, she is my birth mother, because of the resemblance between us. It was unmistakable. Understand, and everybody can relate to this, it's the first time I'd seen anybody who looked like me, which was amazing. That's one of the biggest difficulties. It's feeling a sense of belonging, connection, people who are like you, people who look like you. You can relate to none of that. What is your real genealogy? You don't know. I was raised a certain way. I don't know what it was. When I saw her, it was amazing. So I came in, I knew what I was going to ask her. I sat down, she was very pleasant, smiled at me. And I said, well, I got to ask you a question. Does the date January 23rd, 1950 mean anything to you? Well, it clearly did. She didn't even say anything. She just looked at me, and I looked at her. And her first question was sort of typical, I think. Were you well taken care of? I could tell she struggled with it because she was in such a state of shock. But that was her question. I said, yes, because I have had wonderful adoptive parents. I was a lucky baby, and I was a lucky person. Her next question to this day cracks me up. She asked me, were you a good student? And I said, well, yeah, I'm actually in my third year of law school. Then I asked her, why did you give me up? And she said, you were inconvenient. Can't say I was expecting that. I don't know what I was expecting. Took me aback a bit, but we carried on with our conversation. I cannot tell you much of what we talked about, to be honest with you. I saw pictures of her children, my half siblings, in her office, and boy, I saw a resemblance. This was very spooky for me. I will say she cried at least half the time that I was there. The tears would just come. And she said, oh, I should have dressed up more today if I knew you were coming. So we got into a little bit about my birth father. I asked her about him. She gave me, they didn't marry, obviously. She gave me some information about him that subsequently enabled me to identify him as well. So after about 2 hours, I left. And I cannot remember how we left it. I do not remember how we left it. I can say, though, that about 2 months later, it was Mother's Day. And I sent her a Mother's Day card. The card was returned to me in the mail with a note. Thank you, but please don't contact me again. I wasn't expecting that one either. So, okay, that's how it was. During the next couple of years, I tried to find my birth father, and I did find him 2 years later. And met him. He was very cordial and gracious. And he and I think it would be fair to say, did establish a good relationship. I got to spend time with him over the course of, I guess it would have been about 13 years, and then he passed away. As far as my birth mother, 8 years after I had met her, I got in touch again. I'm thinking, I don't like the way this was left. I'm going to try to see her again. So I actually went through my birth father, who contacted her about me seeing her again, and she acquiesced to that. So I did see her again. This time she was ready. And it was a very unremarkable conversation we had, much briefer. And I'll never forget it. She walked me, or I walked her to her car. And as we left each other, she hugged me and said, "Be a good boy." I never saw her again. We did communicate by phone and later by letter over the next years. She warmed up, and it got to the point where she said one of the times, I think I spoke with her 3 times on the phone. One of the times she said, "I'm so happy I answered the phone. It was so nice to talk to you today." But it was very clear during all of these conversations that she was mortified that someone else would know about me. She never left that, never. But again, things did warm between us, which I'm extremely grateful for. She did pass away 2 years ago. And sadly, I never got to see her again. And I never did speak with her again. During all this time, I've gotten to meet a number of my half siblings. I'm an only child. I was raised an only child. I have 13 half siblings. 9 with my birth father, 4 with my birth mother, and I've met half of them. And receptions have been mixed, to be honest, and I get it. I totally understand it. But there are some, I would say probably 6, that I have a relationship with. And we stay in touch, probably especially half brother on my mother's side. We have stayed in touch, and they've been wonderful. But when my birth mother died 2 years ago, and my birth half sister notified me that my birth mother was in hospice care. So there was some talk, should I come to see her or not? Well, that wouldn't be a good idea, because I didn't want to set her off at that point in time. But what did happen was my half sister, before my birth mother died, did tell my birth mother, "We do know that you had another child." And my birth mother accepted that very graciously. And I was not mentioned, but my half sister asked my birth mother, "What was it like, where you gave birth?" And it was it was a Salvation Army hospital, is where it was. "How was it?" Thinking that, she was going to have some kind of horror story. And she was told, "They were really nice to me. I was well taken care of." So after my birth mother died, I talked to my half brother about, okay, so now what do we do? Because they're going to have a memorial service. And I didn't feel comfortable going. I wanted to go, but I didn't feel comfortable because I had another half brother from my birth mother who refused to acknowledge that I existed. I never met him. He's since passed away, by the way. So I said, "Look, I don't want me to be the story here. This is not about me." I said, "It's best if I don't come." So that was the agreement. An obituary was done. But I have to be honest. not being included in anything and not being mentioned in the obituary was like going back to square one. Again, my existence was being hidden. It was as if I didn't exist. And that's not easy to deal with, to be honest. I understand it, but it's not been easy to deal with. Now, what I've decided to do is I am going to take a trip down to where my birth mother is buried, so that we can be together one last time, alone as we were in the beginning. So that essentially is my story. There's a ton of coincidences in this. I've done this. The search has been extensive. I have a ton of information about my ancestry. One of the big craziest ironies is the fact that I'm a lawyer, and not only was my birth mother a lawyer, so was my birth father, and so was my paternal grandfather. So is my half brother. So is a half sister who's actually a professor of law at Georgetown, along with a number of cousins. I was raised on a farm. Okay. And my relatives that I knew were wonderful people, without exception. But blue collar workers and farmers. So, for this to have happened, the coincidence there just, to me, speaks volumes. And believe me, there are other things that I could tell you. I mean, I have visited grave sites of really all of my ancestors, certainly on my mother's side, in New York State, in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And I have tons of photos. I've done a ton of work on ancestry. I know all of my genealogy now. And it's just been amazing. But I gotta tell you the truth. What I have found, and looking back on this now, I can see it. I was without anything, without any connection for so long that I strove to make connections. Sometimes trying to force connections, like even with my genealogy. I was raised in a German-American household, 100%. Well, it turns out, I'm Irish and I'm Swedish, and a lot Irish, a lot Swedish, some German, some English, some Scottish. And I really gravitated toward the Irish part of it, and some others celebrating St. Patrick's Day and other things like that. And I realized after a number of years that wasn't working. I didn't feel like that was my identity. There are other examples of that I've realized over the years. So now it's interesting. I feel more like Bob Steil, who I am now, than I do anything else. But I cannot say that I feel totally that either. I can also tell you that when I was growing up, before I knew that I was adopted, I didn't feel that I fit in totally. I remember being at a family gathering when I was 9 years old. There are a bunch of people there, and I'm listening to them talk, and it's like, who are these people? I really thought that. It's like, I don't feel connected to them. I don't. So there is still that part of me that feels a void there relative to that. And I accept now that that's just how it is. And I don't think it's just me. I think that this is how it is for adoptees. Really, how else can you feel in many respects? That said, And as I've put it before, the churning and the yearning that I felt when I was young about this, that's gone. Because now I do know so much that I feel part of. And I am so grateful for that. And I am so grateful that I went on my search. Now I want to say something to birth mothers, if there are some on the program here. I have to tell you, I know how I felt and how I feel. You are loved. You may not always be known, but you are loved. And it's hard to define it, but you are. I will also say to adoptive moms, you are loved. And I have viewed my mom, if I had to call someone mom, as the woman who raised me. She and I had a great relationship, as I did with my dad. But I swear I would tell people my mom was my biggest fan. And I am so, because I know how it can be with adoption. I know how it can be. I know I was lucky. I was in the hospital and the home for 2 months. Then I was in foster care for a month. Then I was adopted. So I was adopted after 3 months. I'm blessed that it went that way. I'm fortunate. And trust me, I will be forever grateful that it went that way. So I want the moms here to know, whether you're an adoptive mother or a birth mother, we love you and we'll never forget you. In terms of my fellow adoptees, I can't tell you what to do. I can only tell you what I did. And I know that there are some who don't feel the need to look further. I get it and I respect that. I'm not built that way. And I'm very glad I did it. I will say, I've described some of the bumps in the road that I experienced with my mother, for example. You have to be prepared for any eventuality. And, again, some of my half siblings didn't want anything to do with me. And I get that too. They didn't ask me to come into their lives. Be prepared for that. But be prepared for the possibility. And this has been the case with my birth father, I would say, to a large degree, but certainly with some of my half siblings. I make them smile. The fact that I am their half brother brings them joy. So there's a little bit of that and there's a little bit of this. I think that the stories, I think there's commonality to the experience. There's also uniqueness to the experience. But I will say that for adoptees, if you feel the need or if you feel the urge, don't be afraid. I had it pretty easy. My birth mother had an unusual last name, and it's the name. Oh, by the way, I do have my birth certificate, my original birth certificate, and that contains my original name. And what was interesting, and I didn't know this, I retained that name until I was 1.5 years. It was changed when I was 1.5 years, when the formal adoption was finalized in Illinois. Which when I didn't find that out until about 6 months ago. That sort of freaked me out a little bit, to be honest with you. But I would urge you, don't be afraid, do some digging, check. Resources are wonderful now. It depends on your state, I understand that. But so many more resources are available now than were available. I had nothing. I literally, everything was closed to me. And I was just lucky. I went up to the city where my birth mother signed a paper, and I checked out the city directory in the library, and I found her. I found her, and then I found her brother, and I thought it was her brother. So I had my wife call her brother, who I thought was her brother, and say, do you know so-and-so, and do you know where she lives? And that was my birth mother. And the woman who answered was my cousin, and said, yeah, sure, she lives 50 miles from here, and she's a lawyer. So that's next day we got in the car and we found her. So more or less, Marcie, that's my story. Any questions you have, any thoughts you have, I would welcome them.
Yeah, of course, I've read the essay and a couple of points that you've already shared, but I'd kind of like to get more from the attendees too. Two things, the whole attorney thing. I mean, that's kind of, it really is out there, isn't it? To have that many attorneys in the family, and then you become one. So how you process that when you first, you find out, first of all, that your mom is an attorney. I mean, just that in itself.
There were
going to find out about the rest of the family.
In that day and age, you know how many women attorneys there were.
Yeah.
She had a pretty large graduating class. There were 4.
Yeah.
Now, just to give you the difference, in my graduating class, 50% were women. But when she graduated, 4.
Wow. Yeah. But that's the first thing that I wanted to come on. And then the other one is when you visit on one of your visits with her, when you were getting ready to leave, she said, be a good boy.
Yes.
Okay. Now that just struck me. Okay. Because obviously she was talking from a very different time, and she was seeing you in a different way. And we all know that regression. We step back into the younger version of herself, and that's how she saw you at that moment.
Yes.
And how you process that. I mean, when you heard that.
Yeah, well, you know what? Here's how I processed it. When I was 7 years old, my adoptive grandfather died. Now, again, we were living on a farm. Okay, so my grandparents lived with us, and that sort of thing. I was the only child, and I had a wonderful my grandfather, my adoptive grandfather, was the kindest man I've ever known in my life. He's the first person I remember who read with me. I can still remember it. He would give me rides in his Model T Ford, go back into field roads, and he was a wonderful man. And I can still remember, it was one morning, my mom came downstairs to get me, and she said, come upstairs, Grandpa wants to see you. Well, little did I know that he'd had a stroke 2 days earlier, and there were a bunch of people in the bedroom, which I thought was pretty weird. I didn't know everybody. And I walked up to the bedside, and Grandpa looked at me, and he grabbed my hand and held it and said, be a good boy. So I instantly thought of that, because I never forgot my grandfather telling me that. And I've never forgotten my birth mother telling me that. That was the last time I saw her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that just really stuck out for me in the essay. Yeah. And then I'm sure many are already thinking this, because you're an attorney, and because you have been an attorney for a long time. I noticed you didn't mention anything about studying different state laws on the records being closed, and so right. And of course, we know by the time you got around to your search, Illinois was already open. But I just wondered, after the fact, did you think about that, and how, obviously being an attorney, how you could add to assist with the movement in all states?
Illinois actually was not opened when I began my search. It was not open. It was not open until not that long ago, to be honest with you. But I think the deal with me was I really knew what was on my birth certificate from my folks, from other information I'd seen, and the contacts that I'd made. So it really wasn't necessary for me to see the birth certificate. So, for that reason, I just waited till I had access to it, and I secured it. So, the other part, so I had so much information already that I didn't feel the need to try to open that up because I know what I was going to see. But it was still nice to have information of it, that everything was on there. But right, this is the kind of work I do. I did legislative regulatory work all over the place, representing clients. And I know now, since you and I have talked, the work that you're involved in, and people who are in a position, unlike me, who want information, who don't have access to information, how important something like this is. I have a real recognition of it. And I think if I were still actively practicing, which I'm not, I'm retired as an attorney now. I retained my Illinois license, but I'm not practicing any longer. Were I, and with the contacts I had, might have been a different situation for me in terms of what I might have done. Yeah, because when I get involved in something, I see it through. That's my nature. That's part of being a lawyer, but it's part of me. Always has been.
And Bob, I know you have something close to the 8 o'clock hour that you wanted to read before we open it up to questions from the attendees.
Yeah.
Is this a good time for you to do that now?
This would be great. And one of the things that I've done, and this is something I did recently, I contacted the hospital where I was born to get my birth records and health records. I couldn't get my mother's. They wouldn't give me my mother's, but I secured mine. And then I contacted the agency that handled my adoption, which was in Illinois Children's Home and Aid. And I wanted information relative to my adoption, what went on back in those days. Heard from some great people with that organization. And they sent me 4 pages full of information. And a lot of it contained information relative to the interviews they had with my birth mother before I was born, talking about reasons why she was relinquishing me. It brought a tear to my eye. You could feel her emotion in the letter, in the material I read. It was tough to read. And it left me feeling profoundly sad. But there was something in there that I'm going to read to you now that really struck me. Now, this is verbatim, and they're talking here about what happened to me immediately after my birth. And I'm going to read this just as it is. Immediately after your birth, you were first placed at a Booth Memorial Hospital, which is a Salvation Army hospital, boarding home. On March 17th, 1950, you were placed in a foster home. The workers at Booth Memorial Hospital felt your leaving as bittersweet as they favored you. they were sure to tell the worker with Illinois Children's Home and Aid that your birth mother had requested that you be kissed once a day for her. They hoped this would continue in your new home. That stopped me in my tracks.
Well, yeah, kind of stopped me too. I didn't see that one coming. Oh,
Yeah. And the one last thing, Marcie, one thing my birth mother did tell me is that that she did share with me was that she felt that God would not let her have another boy child after having given me up. The fact of the matter is she did. She had two. But now, what else? Obviously, I will never know. But she did share that with me.
wow. Yeah, and it's important to know too that again, your parents were in love, and she wanted to get married, and there was
Yeah.
a religious difference. But yeah, how sad. How sad
Yeah,
for
yeah.
her.
Yeah, they were in, yeah, and she said that this was in the report, that they were in love. They had been going together for 2 years. She did not tell my birth father that she was pregnant. She came down alone. And what happened was one of her friends told my birth father not that she was pregnant, but that she had traveled down to this city. And he came down immediately. Well, then found out what was going on. And they had discussions, serious discussions about what to do. And in the end, the way it was left in the report was that they had religious differences that were too difficult to surmount, especially in terms of raising a child. My birth mother was Lutheran, as I am, and he was Roman Catholic. Now, what he told me was that she actually had showed a willingness to convert to Catholicism, but that he didn't go along with it because he wasn't ready. So I don't know. I don't know what the truth. But that's how that was left. It's sad. It's and I have pictures. I have pictures of them together. They're heartbreaking. When you see them, you can see the love. You can see the smiles. And, it's just so sad. And it's one of those things where the three people involved, who were spoken about in that letter I wrote, there was an imprint left on all of us that we've retained for the rest of our lives. There's no question about it. No question about it. You don't forget it. You just don't.
And my last question for you, Bob, before we open it up to the audience, how has the fact that you were able to find the answers and connect to so many of your family of origin, how has that impacted your life?
Oh, it's enriched it. It's absolute. First of all, my adoptive parents wanted to adopt another child, a girl. And I found out in later years that they were very close to having that happen. And then there was a problem. I don't know what the problem was, but it might have been with the background of the child. I don't know. But my dad had some concerns. My adoptive father had some concerns, and it fell through. So I was to have had a sister. Now, the sad thing about this, Marcie, both of my adoptive parents have died. Both of my birth parents have died. But in clearing out the house of my adoptive parents, I found, and this is really sad, I could see that my mom had bought a set of clothing for her daughter she never had. It's pink, a small pink outfit. So, but I always wanted a sister. I always wanted a sister. And this is going to sound crazy, sort of how I was, probably still am. Because if she ever, if anybody ever gave her a problem, I'd be there to protect her. That was my attitude. Well, I end up having 9 half sisters. And
Wow.
so that is, and I obviously have met them, spent time with them, met their families. I've known them all for about 12 years now, I guess it is. And it's enriched my life, and I hope that it's enriched theirs. I think it has, but it certainly has helped to round things out. It really has.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing this evening, Bob. And at this time, we'd like to open it up to questions from all of you. Who would like to start us off? Questions for Bob?